came. Some areas in the region are still receiving the rainfall related to El Nino. But more importantly, we want to understand a bit on the science of El Nino. Probably we know there is climate change. Global oceans are warming up. And we want to understand from one of the panelists, who's one of the lead researchers in rainfall over our region, whether the climate change has impacted El Nino to an extent that it is more frequent, it is more intense, and whether it has got impact on our spring or March, April, May rainfall. So we have a team of panelists. I'll not talk about them because they are all on the webpage. If you registered, you are able to know the panelists. But we have two scientists, or rather 3 scientists. We have a gender focal person, and we want to understand how the impact focus base was handled in the region and the role that gender played in this. So from understanding the science, the impact of climate change, to IBF, or impact-based focus, and the activity of gender activities or response to the El Nino rains. So once again, welcome. And I'm going to start off by introducing my co-moderator, just to introduce herself, and then we proceed.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Joyce Jalagat, a gender and climate expert working here at ICPAC. I'm happy to co-host this webinar session. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and looking forward to hearing and also learning from you all. You are welcome.
Thank you very much. So I'll quickly just mention the names of the panelists, and wherever you are, you can just wave your hand like that without talking, so that the people know the panelists that we have. So starting with the lead climate scientist, we have Professor Chris Funk that works for Climate Hazard Center in USA. University of Santa Barbara, I believe you're still there. Thank you for accepting to join. We understand it's very early in the morning, 3 a.m. or thereabout, but thank you for taking time to join. 2, we have one of the most senior scientists that have done a lot of research over the region. We have Dr. Marceline Kudoshava from ICPAC. And then we also have one of the experts, AI experts, artificial intelligence, that is now ICPAC is struggling with modeling, but the IA guy is also trying to help so that we see how to improve forecasting at this place. So we have Dr. Nishad Kaladir. Welcome. He'll talk about the role of impact-based forecasting over the region. Then under the gender, we are going to have Dr. Jocelyn Bigirwa. For impact-based forecasting, gender mainstreaming, early action for extreme climatic events will be given by Dr. Jocelyn Bigirwa. Jocelyn, are you able to wave? So we are going to start by interrogating Professor Chris Funk. Chris Funk has done a lot of research over our region. Actually, I would say it's one of the lead researchers in the Eastern Africa region. He has done quite a lot, and we appreciate your work on El Nino, La Nina, and other drivers of rainfall in the region. Now, the issue here is that when the focus was given, people were not able to understand whether the Nino of 2023-24 will be stronger than 1998, 99, and also 1982-83. We were anticipating that because of global warming, we could be having some changes to the strength intensity of El Nino. Under your research, I'm aware you've just done a recent research on the same. We want to understand from current research finding or your findings, maybe and others that are in the global domain, using improved graded data, And in your view, as one of the researchers on climate over the region, kindly can you tell us if climate change has influenced El Nino rainfall performance, particularly 2023-2024, and its impacts, particularly before, during, and after? Over to you, Prof.
I'm going to talk about how El Nino rainfall over Eastern Africa region has climate change influenced its impacts before, during, and after the events. I'm very honored to be able to participate today. This seems like a really wonderful forum. And, you know, as somebody who has been collaborating with ICPAC since about 2003, I just, you know, the advances that have happened over the last 20 years have really been profound. One of them that Philip already mentioned is just that we're getting more extreme sea surface temperatures. And what we saw, you know, over the last short rainy season, October, November, December, was incredibly warm sea surface temperatures over the eastern Pacific associated with this strong El Nino event, but even warmer sea surface temperatures over the western Indian Ocean, which were tied to the El Nino, but also an event called an Indian Ocean dipole, which happened in conjunction, creating conditions associated with exceptionally heavy rains. And so we'll talk about that today. But the influences of those large scale climate features are being exacerbated by warming in the atmosphere. And this warming kind of paradoxically has two effects. When we have extreme precipitation events like Cyclone Idai shown there, warmer air can hold more water, contributing to more extreme precipitation events. But when things are dry, like they were, you know, between late 2020 through late 2020 through late 2022, when we had a sequence of droughts hit the region, a warmer atmosphere can draw more water from plants and soils, increasing the intensity of droughts. And, you know, I think it's important to recognize that, at least for Eastern East Africa, these risk pathways are extremely predictable. You know, we know now that with climate change, that when we get heavy precipitation, it's going to be heavier than normal. We know that when we get droughts, that rainfall deficits are very likely to be amplified by desiccation due to a warmer atmosphere. And we know that when we get naturally occurring climate events like El Nino, that the ocean waters associated with that event are likely to be hotter than normal, creating a tendency for more events. But the work that ICPAC is doing and others, the national meteorological agencies, you know, are a vital safety guard against these increasingly volatile events. So if we look at the sea surface temperatures, you know, associated with the Indian Ocean and the Indian Ocean dipole, you know, we see that right now on the left here on this slide, we see incredibly warm sea surface temperatures. This is a microwave optimal interpolation sea surface temperature map. And as we get into these purple hues, we see incredibly warm ocean conditions stretching across the Pacific Ocean and much of the Indian Ocean. And, you know, I think if we look at probably the most important driver of the incredibly wet rains that came this October, November, December, you know, we had these really, really, really warm sea surface temperatures. Okay, so I will just back up one slide quickly with a picture and say that we're going to talk about these three risk pathways: extremely warm sea surface temperatures, the fact that the atmosphere can hold more water, which contributes to more extreme precipitation, but during dry events desiccates the vegetation because it draws more moisture from the landscape. And right now we're looking at these incredibly warm, and over October, November, December, we saw, which contributed to the incredibly wet conditions that were so well anticipated by ICPAC. And this is from, in the bottom, the description of this event, where it was written: for the first time in ICPAC's history of forecasting, a higher probability of 85% for above normal to normal was anticipated in some parts of the region. That kind of really strong forecasting, I think, is a tremendous advance in terms of providing actionable climate information. And, it's warranted, I think, because of these exceptionally warm sea surface temperatures that were predicted really well. So, I'm a big believer in obviously looking at data, but also kind of understanding the processes that are driving the climate. And if we look at the heat content in the global oceans, how that's changed over time, right? This is one very valuable measure of climate change. What we see is that, in the last 8 years, since about 2015 to now, we've had as much warming in the ocean as we got from about 1970 all the way through 1999, right? So those are kind of 30-year periods. That was 30 years. We've seen as much warming in the last 8 years. So we're seeing, just in the last 8 years, which have been crazy years for East Africa in terms of climate extremes, right? This massive warming of the ocean. And that heat content moves really slowly. It's really quite well predicted by climate models, and if analyzed appropriately, can form the basis of accurate long lead climate forecasts. And if we look at how sea surface temperatures along the equator have varied over time. So this is a plot that takes a little bit of understanding. It shows standardized sea surface temperatures beginning at the top.
Prof, mind about time? If you could, Professor, if you could mind about time, you are almost getting to close. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because of all the. Okay.
Can move faster.
Okay, so thank you, Philip. Yeah. So basically, the sea surface temperatures are varying dramatically over time from the west to the east. And we know that when it's really warm in the area around Indonesia, we have lots of heating, and that tends to be associated with droughts. And when we have an El Nino like we did this year, we have lots of heating over the Eastern Pacific and Eastern East Africa. And as the atmosphere is warming, we see increases in the convergence of heat and moisture over both the Eastern Pacific, creating stronger El Ninos, and the Western Indian Ocean and Eastern East Africa that creates flooding. And as climate change is getting stronger, that's increasing. And so the take-home message of that is that if we look at a bar plot of standardized precipitation index values for the Eastern Horn of Africa region, basically blue and green bars are wet seasons and orange and red bars are dry seasons, we see a whipsaw behavior with the October, November, December season of the last year being probably the second wettest on season, though that average masks the fact that you had some places that were almost certainly wetter than they've ever been, like in the Somali region of Ethiopia, which in turn supported flooding in Somalia and the Juba and Shabelle. But, since 2016, we've had 8 droughts associated with, most of them with La Nina events, which are potentially predictable and could be predicted. And we've had 5 exceptionally wet seasons, some of them associated with El Niños and Indian Ocean dipoles, some associated with subseasonal variations, and only 2 normal seasons. So, asking whether East Africa is getting wetter or drier, I think, is a lot less valuable than understanding that it's becoming more volatile and extreme. And we're worried about forecasts going out to October, November, December of this year, suggesting that we're going to quickly transition from El Nino into a La Nina, which, based on the research that we've been doing with ICPAC and others, suggests that we may very well see yet another sequence of back-to-back droughts in October, November, December, in March, April, May of 2024 and 2025. Because when we've seen on October, November, December La Nina, there's a high frequency shown here with this yellow shading in this curve of there being below normal rains. So it's quite possible that we can sequence again from incredibly wet conditions into a series of back-to-back droughts in 2024 and 2025. But when that happens,
Thank
are we out
you,
of time?
Prof.
We're out of
Thank
time?
you. 1 minute to wrap up, please.
Okay. And so we know that if those events happen, whether it's wet or dry, that a warming atmosphere is going to intensify both the wet and the cold events. And so that's another way that climate change is making things extreme. But we can address that by, storing water when we think it's going to be exceptionally wet, and having interventions to preserve soil moisture when it's dry. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you. This was very important because this is the key knowledge to our discussion today. And thank you for this extensive research work and more informed coming seasons. I think we have quite a number of humanitarian assistant people in the room, and they are taking this seriously. So the other question, maybe you would answer it during other question. Meanwhile, I want to encourage participants that please don't raise up your hand now. Just type your questions on the Q&A utility. They will be answered by the panelists. Thank you so much, Professor, for that. The next focus will be on what came to pass. We are now in February. We have already gone through the OND, October, November, December rains. Well, let's see what happened, if there is anything nearer to what the prediction gave. And again, we want to see whether this will be told, whether this is the impact was much greater compared to other El Niños or not. So to come on board is Dr. Marceline. Please take the floor and tell us the impact as it happened in October, November, December.
Thank you, Dr. Philip, for that. And thank you, Prof, for laying the foundation. And I think we could see the impact of, so let me start off with kind of showing some of the impacts that occurred over the region. So this is preliminary analysis on what happened. So from here, we can see that approximately 1.8 million people were displaced. And then we have an estimated population of 3.5 million people that were affected. So I'm just going to briefly play a video where we can see a flooding event that occurred. And I think this was over the northern parts of Kenya. So we can actually see how bad the situation was. in this past October, November to December season. So we can see a lot of households were destroyed, roads were destroyed, and people were displaced. So now, having a look at the total rainfall that was received over the region. So what we can see is that we had a number of areas that received over 1,000 millimeters. So we can see up to 1,000 millimeters, sorry. So we can see parts of Somalia, parts of northern Kenya, and then also the coastal areas. And then also looking at Tanzania and Burundi, these regions received up to 1,000 millimeters. And then we can see that the other parts received 300 to 500 millimeters. And then looking at how this translates to what normally happens. So from here, in terms of the anomalies, which is the difference between the climatological mean. So in this case, we looked at 1991 to 2020 as our climatological mean. So what we can see here is most parts of the region received enhanced rainfall. So we can see most parts of the southern parts of Ethiopia, parts of Somalia, and then northern Kenya, southern parts of Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, and coastal Tanzania. They received over 200 millimeters of what they normally receive. And then looking now at the start of the rainfall season. So what we see is that in terms of the onset, so we can see that in some areas there was delayed onset over parts of Somalia, parts of southern Ethiopia, and then some parts of Tanzania. And then there was early onset over the northern parts of the eastern parts, mostly of Kenya, and then the western parts of Tanzania. So when we look at some of these areas, it's usually a continuation of the JJAS season, so we don't pay that much attention to them. And then the delayed onset over parts of Somalia, this could have been caused by the tropical cyclone that happened during October. And then in terms of cessation, I think all of us can tell that the season was quite longer than what we normally expect. We still received rainfall way into January over most parts of the region. So we can see here that the cessation was later than what would be expected over all the parts. So if we look at Somalia from the central to the southern parts, and then also southern Ethiopia, and then also kind of extending into some northwestern parts. And then also looking at Uganda, we can see that the cessation was later than usual. So we can see here the season extended over most parts of Uganda, except for this area near the Karamoja area. And then also Tanzania, we are focusing mostly on the northern parts because the southern parts, this is still in season, so we don't focus on the cessation here. But we can see that in most areas, the cessation extended, with only cessation occurring earlier than usual over some parts of Kenya. And then in terms of the intensity for the anomalies, so we can see that heavier than usual rainfall was received during the rainy days. So we can see especially over parts of Somalia, the coastal areas of Kenya and Tanzania, and then also Western Tanzania. And then in terms of the wet days anomaly, so during this OND season, we received more wet days over most parts of the region. So kind of looking at how it compares with other El Nino years. So in this case, we also have the years that had positive IOD. So we have 1997, and we can see 1997 is still the wettest on record. But from here, we can see that 2023 is the second wettest when we are comparing the years where we had El Nino and then also the IOD. And then this is a preliminary ranking also of all the years. So we can see that for now, with the preliminary data, 2023 is ranking as the second wettest year after 1997. Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Dr. Maslin. Really fruitful, telling us what happened. You've given us more even on the delayed onset, and you've also given us about the extended or late cessation. So that reminds me of a question that was very common in town. People are asking about January rainfall. In most of the equatorial parts of the region, there were a lot of rains in January. So people are asking us what has happened. January is known to be dry, but it is wet this time. So you'll later on give us a reason, or Professor Chris can also give us, when you have a Nino, does the rain overlap up to the next season, or what happened? So those are the questions that people will also want to know about. Good, we have seen 1997 still the wettest, but 2023 second. If you look at the Nino areas, the action area where a Nino, the engine, where the engine is, you will see that the Nino index are not in the same order as the impact in terms of rainfall. I remember checking 1997 is still the highest, followed by 1982-83 in terms of indices. But we have seen the rainfall here is much more than in 1982-83. So it doesn't mean that if you have the higher indices, it translates to rainfall. The other factors, and Professor, you could later on maybe touch on that. So thank you so much, Dr. Maslin. Now we have seen Dr. Maslin giving us the absolute values that were realized at the end of the season. Now we have what we call the impact-based focus. The idea here, as we are going to be given by the expert, we are looking into a situation whereby those figures we've seen shown by Dr. Maslin, how can we predict them? That central part of Uganda is going to receive 300 millimeters, or northern part of Tanzania will receive 400 millimeters of rainfall. It is still a mystery. It's not easy to focus absolute, but now we even have issues to do with intelligence, artificial intelligence, that we are hoping will somehow unravel such. So we want to hear briefly about the role of impact-based forecasting in the context of extreme events. And we have an expert here, Dr. Nishad. I want to ask Dr. Nishad the role of IBF, or impact-based focus, in early warning and early action in the context of disaster risk management. Go ahead, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Philip, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So in the case of impact-based forecasting, it is actually a upgradation of the current weather forecast conceptually, including the impact it's going to be, the weather forecast going to be happen in the region. So in the case of the conceptual background, it involves a set of risk matrices. So Dr. Philip, on his welcome address, he told that the El Nino event was predicted well before, and there is a communication gap in that. So the risk matrices, what it does is it gives a kind of a traffic light related communication, the risk communication, where it very optimized way of communicating the risk. So for example, if it is red, you take action. If it is green, you don't take action, or in between, you observe and you be aware for the process. So this kind of optimization in communication, we can achieve through the impact-based focus. forecasting, where we need to have a set of components we need to include it in that, because the risk management context, the IBF, what it wants to do is to take action or make the actionable information for the policy, for the decision makers to take action. So that is why we need to have a kind of an optimized risk communication as well through the traffic light maps. So the IBF, what we are trying to develop in ICPAC is in this aspect of, or in this vision, to make the weather or climate forecast in terms of actionable information to stakeholders to take action in that aspect. So we were discussing about or making in conceptual understanding and development related to the IBF, and we found that there are several or 6 set of components involved in that, starting with requirement of ensemble prediction system. So current IBF, we can see that in East Africa Hazard Watch, ICPAC website, where there are a preliminary setup of giving impact related to the extreme weather predictions are available. But this IBF, what we are trying to do is to add a set of ensemble prediction system in the as an input for the impact-based forecast generation. So why we need to have an ensemble forecasting system? So it requires a kind of an uncertainty determined in that. So current forecast of deterministic or single forecasting based system has issues in addressing this kind of uncertainty quantification and that. So because the decision makers need a valid and the error identified information. So this is a kind of an information which is required for to take decision making. So this ensemble prediction system is an one component in that, and the second component is converting this forecast, the rainfall forecast, into a contextual information. So, for example, if a rainfall is forecasted, for example, in my home, the level of water, what determines me to move out of the home or make a displacement from the home. So because that conversion we need to do. So that is in a hazard modeling in which we apply certain hydrological and hydrodynamic model in which the precipitation forecast is going to be the input data, and which will give the inundation level or the water level in my home. So that makes the decision. So that is a kind of a contextualization. For example, in the case of drought, it will be like SPA for the meteorological drought or agriculture drought. There are indexes are available like water requirement satisfaction index. So this is a conversion of precipitation forecast or the weather forecast into a contextual information. So this is one step, and the next step is the impact calculation, where we will be including certain layers of information like exposure data, the vulnerability, and there is an interlinkage between this vulnerability or the exposure and the vulnerability, or the level of water, what makes the level into the disaster or the impact it going to be happen on the ground level. For example, if the 1 meter is the level makes me to move away, 2 meter, maybe the 2 meter level is going to be the disaster for a road or infrastructure. So that difference is there. That makes how the impact is going to be in the ground level. So this information, if you are putting, and we can generate certain impact calculations or impact related values available. So once we we go back to the risk matrices where the output of the IBF we were discussing. In the risk matrices, the risk is determined based on the two matrices, two axes. The one is the probability of the event going to be happen, and the another is the probability of the impact it going to be, or the level of the impact is going to be happen. So this two axis is what makes that the final outcome of traffic lights or the traffic light related visualization. So these are the components we need to use to generate the IBF. which is actually to a kind of converting the objective forecast or the objective science-based forecast into a kind of a subjective knowledge, as Professor Chris was showing in his presentation, the last slide, he was showing about the risk management and the resilience measures. It becomes the wisdom or coming from the knowledge of all this input data. So once all these setups are like in a top-down approach, we making a physical modeling or in scientific modeling on that. But there is one of the important element is missing, where that is the requirement of bottom-up information. That is the very subjective knowledge or the expert knowledge or the local population's knowledge is to be included in this set. So we were discussing about that. There is another set, all this set of component in the IBF. That means that is the set of risk and decision analysis. It is a kind of an analytical tool we were identified and being developed to use, where we can include several informations in terms of Bayesian reference or Bayesian inference form. So we are trying to use a Bayesian network. So this is a tool. It's a very simple diagrammatic tool where we can include all the informations we have and the informations given by the local experts or the stakeholders in a conditional probability form. So that is one of important aspect as well in this set of information flow or generating the IBF. So all this information set, we can final outcome will be a set of the traffic light map, which will be giving in a specific decision or the very optimized risk communication. So that is what we are trying to develop with the IBF, and it has that has the role in disaster risk management in terms of making the weather forecast into an actionable information. So that is the role it can play in disaster risk management as an IBF.
Thank you very much, Nishad, for that. And can you in 1 minute tell us where this has been successful? Any region, any place that you are aware this has been successful?
Yes, there are several examples in terms of anticipatory actions implementation or forecast-based financing implementation. For example, in 2000, there is a cyclone is being forecasted in Bangladesh, and where this kind of information, where they converted the actual weather prediction into a kind of an impact-based forecast well before 1 week before, and that makes United Nations to release certain amount to give the anticipatory relief to that population going to be exposed. So this is a kind of a set of framework being developed and used in there are other locations as well being successfully used, and the idea is that even though the in terms of ICPAC East African Hazard Watch portal, and there are very preliminary versions of impact-based forecasting is being provided, the current workflow where the currently being developed will be much useful in this kind of anticipatory action and making the decision-making actionable information.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We hope we will also be one-time success story to other regions if this one works very well. I want to give it over to my co-moderator, Joyce, to engage the next presenter. Joyce, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Philip. Thank you, Nishad, Dr. Maslin, and Dr. Professor Frank. Having heard from the scientific perspective on the impact of El Nino, we want to hear on a social perspective, as we all know that climate impacts are not gender neutral. There are specific impacts or vulnerabilities that are affecting women, children, and other gender groups. So we want to hear from our colleague, Jocelyn Bigirwa, who is here with us, on to shed light on how El Nino impacted women, children differently, and also to bring out the perspective of incorporating gender into the impact-based forecasting. So welcome, Jocelyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Joyce and ICPAC, for organizing this very brilliant seminar, webinar. I think this is the second time we are speaking about gender issues. We did the same in preparation for the last GHACOF, and I'm happy that we are doing it again. And thank you, my other panelists that have really spoken well about the scientific aspects of all this. I'm going to be more focused on the social perspective of El Niño and what it means. And I'm very sure you know that there are not so many organizations that have conducted thorough research on these issues. Most of what I'm going to share is information that is coming from different pieces of work that have been done by us as IGAD, but also other institutions that we have been interfacing with. I'm really happy that we are speaking about this in preparation for the next GHACOF, and I'm hopeful that whatever we are discussing here is going to inform the next GHACOF, the kind of information that is going to be coming out, because most times in the past, we've always been writing more about or releasing information about how the weather is going to look like, but not how it's going to impact on the different sectors. So my presentation today is going to be focusing how the different groups of people have been affected by El Niño in different sectors. Speaking about the impact-based forecasting, what we have seen is that in the past, after the forecast of how it was going to, how the sound was going to look like, you all know that in the Eastern Horn of Africa, we've received more rains than was expected. And as I speak now, I'm seated here in Entebbe in Uganda, and it's been raining for about like 3 hours now. And February is usually a very dry season, but it's been heavily raining and the internet connection has been very poor. So you realize that across the region, just like the video that we saw, most parts of the region that were initially known to be very dry, like Mandela in northern Kenya, they received very huge rains. I'll give you specific examples from what I witnessed personally in Mandela. When El Niño came, most households were displaced. Most affected ones were the disabled, the young children, the women. Of course, the able-bodied women were not as much as affected as the disabled women. And of course, the elderly. I'll tell you that people were moved to a camp where they stayed for some time, but people lost their property. People lost their property. They lost their property in terms of the household utensils, but also the homes were destroyed. Roads were affected. Infrastructure in terms of schools, health centers were all affected. We saw women lining up for food. Of course, women being the household caretakers, the care burden so much on them, they needed still to be providing for the households. So they had to be lining for food, to pick food for their families, to ensure that this food is prepared, seeing all their property being lost because of the floods. So we saw that not only in Mandera, but also in other parts of the Eastern region, that women, when it came to those that were selling on the roadside, because you know, when you talk about the informal sector, majority are women. Majority in the informal sector are women. I was in Nairobi and I saw how women were struggling to sell their foodstuffs on the roadside. With the rains coming, they are packing things, they are losing all their fresh vegetables, and it was really bad. And this is not only in Nairobi, but also in other parts of the region, in urban centers, in urban centers, in cities. Women, when it came to trade, they lost all their food. We haven't talked about the farmers. The majority of the women farmers, when we saw what happened, most of them are poor. They do not have proper post-harvest facilities. They lost their foodstuffs because of the heavy rains. They lost their foodstuffs. Some did not have the labor to harvest on time. Some did not have sufficient post-harvest facilities to take care of their food harvests. So we saw that agriculture was affected a lot, but especially the women, the disadvantaged, the poor who were affected most. Majority could not get their food transported because of the rains. They are losing their food from the gardens. Whenever they get it collected, all that is wasted. When you talk about water and sanitation, we see like the example of the video that was projected. When I was in Mandera, women were struggling to find water. Water is always a problem during the dry season, but it was worse. There are lots of infections that children got infections because of the floods. And it was the responsibility of the women. It was the responsibility of the older girls to look after their young ones, to look after the elderly. The health centers were destroyed. And, women needed to ensure that all the family members kept in good health. So we saw that because of that, in most parts of it has been studies, especially for institutions that have been doing work around GBV, that there are lots of protection issues when women are trying to find a refugee in places where they can be able to live safer. They have been, subjected to sexual violence by those that are supposed to be taking care of them. Those who seem to be, showing that they can be able to offer the help are the same people that are really, exploiting them. We saw a lot of displacements in most parts of the East African region because of the El Nino. When we talk about impact-based forecasting, what we really need to be doing is that at this point, we need to be doing more of an analysis of how are the different sectors likely to be affected. When you look at the health sector, how are the women going to be affected in relation to the health sector? How about education? How is the education sector going to be affected? And if the El Nino comes again and the heavy rains, the floods, and the schools close, who is going to be affected most? And what does it mean? And what do we need to do? What we see across the IGAD region, being in discussion with the different member states, and while doing my work as part of the Agriculture and Environment Division, most of these member states don't really have budgets that can be able to take into consideration, to account all the impacts that the different groups of people are going to face. That has not really happened so far. Even the institutions that are responsible for emergency preparedness, the forecasting hasn't really helped them to do projection of what it means, what kind of emergency preparedness and response plans do we need to have in place. And this is the point, that this is the time we need to be doing this. We need to ensure that, we have in place gender responsive emergency preparedness and response plans. And I'm hoping that the discussions that we are having today, we are not only having the scientists. I look at the group that is in this meeting, over 150 people, that we need to take this information that in our different, at our different levels in our different institutions, we really need to be working around this, that we are looking at the impact the forecasting is going to have on the different groups, because that's what has been lacking. We do not have sufficient data. Can we really invest in generating data on how these different sectors and subsectors have been affected, and how the effect has impacted on the different marginalized groups, including the women, the youth, the children, the people with disabilities, and the elderly. Because me coming to this meeting, I use it as a platform for not just talking about what is happening, but for appealing also to key institutions and stakeholders that are present in this room, that our next forecasting should be able also to guide and advise the member states and the different stakeholders on what needs to be done to ensure that the forecasting is more gender responsive, and that the different subsectors and sectors can be able to come up with preparedness plans, gender responsive preparedness and response plans. I can end it at this, Joyce, and if there is anything that I need to add at some point later, then I can be able to pick it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justine, for the very insightful suggestions that you've given us. And I think it would be important to not stop this conversation here, but to continue this and to see how we can move forward in terms of ensuring that we include gender perspectives in the IBF, in our forecasting, in developing disaster risk management plans, and also gender responsive emergency plans. So so another question to you, Afanulon, if you can just mention in a few words. So how do you see us moving forward in terms of considering that in the field of climate services, we have not really had gender as the key. We can say that in climate action and adaptation, gender has been somehow been included. So how do we move forward in climate services in ensuring that the products that we produce, and also in ensuring that we communicate to reach all gender groups?
Probably the panelists can also respond to questions, please. There are quite a number of questions on Q&A before we come to the next round of questions. I would request panelists to attempt to answer them online. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce. I really appreciate that we're again speaking about this, and in terms of what we need to do to make sure that we can engender our climate services. As I mentioned before, and also the discussions that we had at the previous pre-GHACOF agenda webinar, what is very important at this stage is to make sure that we have adequate data, that is palatable enough for the different groups. I have seen and observed that most times the forecast, the kind of information that comes out, of course, it's regional information, but it tends to be very complicated for the different groups, especially the ordinary groups. And understanding that in our East Africa, Horn of Africa region, majority of the people that we are targeting that are so much impacted by this may not necessarily be able to understand English. They cannot be able to read. And therefore, they may not be able to make use of the information, which is really, really relevant. So my suggestion to the different stakeholders, of course, I know that the information from at the regional level will be definitely in English, but making sure that at the country level, that the member states can be able to simplify further the information, and that it can be able to translate to the different local languages. Local languages taking into account that majority of the women, the elderly, the children probably may not be able to understand the complicated terms, scientific terms that are being used in these the bulletins that come out. Secondly, we need to make sure that, when we look at the communication channels that we use, majority of the women and even the men living in rural areas may not necessarily have access to the printouts that are put on different offices, on different notes boards, but majority of these people use radios, and also use social groupings, like information can be passed on through churches, through different social gatherings. All this requires that there is budget that can facilitate that. But having an understanding and an agreement on the appropriate channels of passing this information to different groups is very important. That informs the kind of the budget and the resources that will be needed to make sure that that happens. Then another area where we can be able to ensure that we address the gender issues and the inequalities that exist, we need really to find, because I know that on this platform, we have stakeholders, both civil society organization, government stakeholders that have subnational and lower level structures, that we can be able to transfer this information in the most appropriate languages and, best packages, use different community-based organizations, women's groups, and that they can be able to mobilize women on the ground, especially when we go to the rural areas, those that are involved in agriculture and also in different other sectors. mobilizing them to be able to understand the information that we are passing out, because this information most times tends to be very, very relevant. I'll personally give you an example that when I was sharing the weather forecast for last season, and everyone was like, we've not seen this. And to be very frank with you, this information rarely gets the people, especially the women who are so much involved and affected by this, don't get to get this information. So we need to ensure that we have the right communication channels that are accessible by women. And I can tell you that the different countries of the IGAD member state solutions, but to do more of how it's working, what needs to be done, and then we can engage and ensure that this information gets there. Then another key important thing is that when we are giving out this information, we need to disaggregate it. Sure, because most people need to feel attached to be able to take action, say how at what extent did it affect women compared to men? To what extent were the elderly affected compared to other groups? So having a sex disaggregated data of the impact of the different weather forecasts is very important. And with that, the different stakeholders, the decision makers, and those different program implementers will be able to take action in ensuring that the climate services are being, accessible, and that the different groups are reached, because they'll be able to, have that commitment to be able to take action.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Jocelyn, for your inputs on that. Yeah, so we move on to the second set of questions.
Yeah, thank you, my co-moderator. Thank you, the panelists, for that insightful discussion. I see our time is gone. We are 5 minutes past 1 hour, and we are supposed to end this in the next 25 minutes. Now, I want to go back and engage Chris Funk. And as I engage Professor, there are many, many questions that are coming to you. I would pray that you try to answer them online, but we'll sample some which are very critical for the audience. I will also give 1 or 2 participants just to ask online, their questions. Now, Professor, one thing that is also a mystery to us, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, people, when we have El Nino and IOD, IOD is Indian Ocean Dipole. We know the two when they're in a positive phase, we have extremely wet region. Now, the question is, other than El Nino and IOD, do you have any other predictor that can come into play, particularly when the two leading predictors appear to be neutral over the Pacific Ocean for ENSO and also over the Indian Ocean? And then together with that, Professor, there is a question here that we would also like you to answer from Callista, more or less the same as that. Is it possible to quantify the contribution of IOD rainfall performance during an El Nino year or season over Eastern Africa region? And how can we trace the impact of climate change on two seasonal climate drivers, the IOD and ENSO? I hope you've understood the question, the 2 questions.
Yeah, I heard. Can you please repeat the second question, Philip? I'm sorry,
yes,
I cut out.
The second question is by Callistus Wachana, one of the scientists at ICPAC who are in forecasting, is wondering whether it is possible to quantify the contribution of Indian Ocean Dipole on rainfall performance during an El Nino year or season or over Eastern Africa region, or how can we trace the impact of climate on the two seasonal? Remember, the impact of climate change is seasonal forecast or seasonal performance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So, I think if we think about drivers, besides the Indian Ocean Dipole and El Nino, and, specifically, I think, looking forward to this upcoming March, April, May season, things really look quite neutral. We haven't been in very many neutral seasons, but I think our expectation is that the El Nino is going to be fading. the Indian Ocean dipole is fading. And I think we're coming into a season of quite weak predictability, that there's not going to be a lot of strong, seasonal climate drivers. And then I think we're kind of in an area where there's been some research, for example, by Carolyn Wainwright and others, that have suggested that if it's exceptionally warm in the southwestern Indian Ocean, that may delay the onset of the long rainy season. But on the other hand, if it's exceptionally warm in the northwestern equatorial Indian Ocean, we may see another very wet season again. So I think we're coming into a season where the variability is quite hard to predict. And so I don't have a strong feeling about what's going to happen. However, looking forward into the next short rainy season, there seems to be a building confidence in the anticipation of La Nina. And when that happens, I think there could be a really good chance of drought in both October, November, December, and then again in March, April, May. And, we worked with ICPAC to do analyses suggesting that when there's an October, November, December La Nina, there's a really elevated chance of a dry March, April, May following. So that's the first question. I think on the, trying to untangle El Nino and Indian Ocean dipole from each other and kind of isolate their influences, I think that's, really quite difficult. Except that I would say that I think of the two, the Indian Ocean dipole, is the stronger driver. But often you see Indian Ocean dipole events occurring alongside El Niños, and it seems like the El Nino helps set up the conditions that produce the Indian Ocean dipole, but it's really those super warm Western Indian Ocean sea surface temperatures that are probably the biggest driver of the very wet conditions. And so we saw that in 1997, 98, and again, we're seeing it, right now we just saw it in this season. Over. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure if you answered the one on the two season quantifying what is been contributed by IOD.
Oh, which, yeah, I guess I was trying to say, Philip, that I think it's really hard to separate, like this much is the El Nino, this much is the Indian Ocean dipole. They're really confounded, I think.
Thank you very much for your candid answers. I just want to ask one more question to Dr. Marceline, then I'll give my co-moderator to proceed with the questions online or whatever you wish to ask. Dr. Marceline, one more that you need to know. For the first time in history of ICPAC, I've been here for long. I've never seen a probability of 85. And even generally, this time 85, what does that message, what does it portray to users of this seasonal focus, 85? And what motivated the forecasting team to come up with 85? And did you achieve 85 as it was predicted?
Okay, so I think I'll go back a bit before getting to why 85. So before, when we're producing the forecast, it used to be the consensus forecast. So where you have people coming in with their expert knowledge to say, we think it will be above normal, below normal, or it will be normal. So you can see from that, it was more like it's subjective. But now, because we are looking at an objective forecasting system, the way we came up with the probabilities was based on what the methods we utilized gave us. So we did not adjust those probabilities to say what is the chance of getting enhanced rainfall in this region. So that is how we came up with those probabilities. And maybe to kind of explain, the probabilities are telling us that we have this chance of getting above normal, but they are not telling us exactly that we are going to get this much rainfall. So in this case, the chances were enhanced for us to get above normal rainfall, which is what transpired on the ground.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That is really correct. So to users, when you see probabilities, don't take it in terms of the amount. Take it in terms of the chances. So there are very high chances, and as you have been correctly told, it was based on the methodology that was adopted. And if you are somebody planning with the 3 categories, I want to put more on the higher category than the lower category. So thank you so much for that. I want to hand over to my co-moderator to proceed.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Philip. So here's a question for you, Jocelyn. Someone would like to know the mechanisms that can be used to ensure equitable inclusion of women and marginalized groups in decision-making processes related to El Nino.
Thank you, Joyce. That's a very interesting question. Of course, talking about women's representation and participation in decision-making is more of a governance issue, but it's also more of a social norms issue. When we look at, for example, the impact of El Nino happens at the community level so much. So meaning that for the different structures, we really need to have the women represented either in the village health committees, disaster management committees, and they can be able to inform and influence what needs to be done. And most times what we see is that usually the women that are brought to those committees are women that are part of the formal or governance structures, the local councils, that local councils that are in place, either the village or parish or sub-county or Pebede councils. And most times, those councils, you find that the representation of women is not as big as that of men. Or even when we have a third policy, it doesn't really apply most times on the ground. It's more of having the women in numbers, but not really the ones that can be able to engage. So what we need to do to ensure that we can get women represented in these different structures where decision-making takes place, we need to deliberately put in place to do interventions or implement which are aimed at building the leadership capacities of at different levels. When with the different institutions, especially the civil society organizations, they have been doing that. UN agencies, civil society organizations have been doing that. And they've been mainly doing work around sexual and gender-based violence and all other aspects. When we're doing the gender analysis study, guys, that there are very few women that understand climate change issues in Uganda, in Kenya, and in Djibouti. On the ground, there are very few. It's the technical officers that understand, but you get to the community, that understanding is not there. So building the capacity of the different women's groups at different levels to understand and appreciate climate change, and they can be able to interpret and can be able to engage at that level is very important. So civil society organizations, they really have very mobilizing women, building their capacity, undertake trainings on climate change, the impacts of climate change, and also specifically design leadership trainings for the women so that when they go to these meetings, it's not just about warming the chairs, but they can be able to voice their concerns and that they can be able to follow through that the issues that have raised have been taken into consideration. That requires a process and it also requires time, but also mobilizing the key power holders. When you talk about power holders, these are the people who have been in these positions and have not allowed the women to get into these spaces. These include the men, these include the leaders, the local councils that are majorly male dominated, but also the traditional structures because fear the affiliations, the different institutions, but also the religious institutions. We need to build their capacity to understand and appreciate the importance of women engaging and participating in decision-making processes, especially not only on this, but all other areas that impact on their lives. So if we really did that, the power holders on board, we sensitized them, we mobilized them, that we supported them to mobilize the women, we would have more women engaged in decision-making. And then in addition to the capacity of the women themselves, these two are critical strategies that need to be employed by the different stakeholders.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Jocelyn. And yes, thank you so much. And I like the note that you've also mentioned that we should also include men and local leaders in these efforts of ensuring that gender mainstreaming is achieved, not only having women to discuss their own issues, because gender is not really about women, but ensuring that there's inclusivity. So there's a question on integrating indigenous knowledge. I don't know whether, Jocelyn, you can also answer that. How can we ensure that we can integrate indigenous knowledge into modern forecasting?
Yes, thank you, Joyce. Yes. Joyce, can you hear me and everyone?
Yes, we can
Yes.
hear you.
Yeah, so the question of indigenous knowledge is very critical. And previously, even before joining IGAD, working on issues of disseminating weather information, this always came out, and especially from women. From my interaction with different groups in different countries of the IGAD region, women are the forefront of really weather forecasting using the indigenous knowledge. And most times because we do not involve women in decision making and also giving them space, even when there are small meetings, women do not speak. So they do not share their experiences of how this indigenous knowledge has really helped them. So it's really important that spaces are created for specifically picking information from different communities. And we really have not prioritized this, although from the different member states, this has been coming through. So we need to create spaces specifically for ensuring that we can be able to generate, information. What kind of indigenous knowledge comes from Karamoja, for example? What kind of indigenous knowledge comes from Mandera, comes from, Masabit, that comes from, other parts of Kenya, where women have informed? Because when you talk about this, women have been involved so much in agriculture, and they know when the bird sings from this side of the house, then it means this. But such are never taken or considered to be very important. And because the women's voice is usually not considered very important, so it's left out. So we need to invest. Institutions, not only civil society, but also government. We have spoken about this before. We need to invest in generating information around indigenous knowledge from different communities, consolidate it, synthesize it, and see how best that can be integrated with the scientific knowledge that we use. And people really consider more of the indigenous knowledge than the scientific knowledge. When we were recently in Karamoja, they were saying, okay, so for us, we hear on the radio, it means this, but our own predictions have actually proved that to be correct, but that was never taken into consideration. So while we sit here and speak as specialists, as the elites, we need to understand that there is a lot of very useful, powerful information that exists with these different so-called named as traditional, poor communities, but which really mean a lot to us, and we need to take advantage of that knowledge, document it, and make it more shareable across. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn, and I'd like to give Jocelyn to add into that.
I think I'll pick up from the last point that Jocelyn talked about, documentation of this information. I was having a chat with a colleague from the Kenya Meteorological Department, and they highlighted that when you look at the indigenous knowledge, the focus from those, and then the scientific knowledge, when you integrate this, people are more receptive to the information. So it increases the uptake. And currently, this is mostly being done at community level during the participatory scenario planning. So what I guess now is really lacking is how do you kind of find a way of really integrating these two in terms of having this indigenous knowledge and then also the scientific knowledge. Maybe we can hear from the artificial intelligence gurus if this can actually be done at a regional level after documenting all this information. Is it something that is really possible to do that?
Just before Nishad comes, I think that is one of the questions that was asked by Emad Yassin. Is AI making things better going forward? I know there's a lot of interest and people are laying a lot of hopes because probability has failed them or is not delivering for them. Is AI going to put us somewhere better to give a combined focusing and impact-based focus so that the region can benefit? Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Meslin and Dr. Philip for that question. So actually, we have very high hope and there are very much good use cases are there related to how the AI can be used in this aspect of, for example, in the first question of how the traditional knowledges and the scientific knowledge can be integrated. We can take that, for example, starting with the, so we were discussing about the Bayesian networks. So it is a very old machine learning or artificial intelligence related technique being used so far like 20 years or 40 years back. Being started to use. So these Bayesian networks where we can integrate this kind of different streams of knowledge and with different certainty, like conditional probability we can give to that aspect, and we can model that information and question specific required questions to that. So for example, you have this set of informations and we modeled this in the form of Bayesian networks. So we can ask what is the alternative scenario if the condition goes worst in the situation, or the worst situation is happening rather than the forecasted one. So that is the one approach the artificial intelligence can give, where this knowledge blending or knowledge integration. So we need to understand that there are two different streams of information is coming. One is the objective forecast, the numerical modeling, and another is a expert knowledge or the local information or the subjective information. So these two things, it is better to integrate especially with the advent of large language models, the artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, where it has very promising utility, where this kind of narrative or subjective informations can be actually integrated very much useful.
Thank you.
That is the promising
Thank
thing.
you very much. Thank you very much. I see our time is almost ending. We have like 4 minutes, but I want to add here that IK or indigenous knowledge is more participatory because they are involved in the prediction at community level. So villagers go over it together, and so there is a lot of acceptance. This objective focusing is done in isolation with scientists alone. So we only give the end products to the community, which they don't know how it was generated. So that is the main disconnect here. So if we could have a community going through with scientists how they do focusing, I think there'll be a high level of acceptance. Then secondly, I want to say that previously we were doing what we call consensus, and we have done it in IPAC where we have a community doing their indigenous knowledge forecasting, IPAC doing this computer forecasting, and this is blended to give us a consensus. But WMO, the World Meteorological Organizations, recommended that we stick to objective forecasting, where you only use computer science to give a prediction. So if we are able to have a parallel of having the two, and then we blend, I think there will be high level acceptance. So thank you so much, Marceline and Nishad, for that. I just want to say under agenda that we have also had very good contribution from one of the gender experts in the region. We have Dr. Pamela, who is also doing a lot of work on gender. There are some very good contributions that she has given online. So I would ask that you look into them. So thank you so much, Pamela. And we also appreciate Emad for so many questions. Maybe you are sharing the gadget because there are so many questions under Emad Yassin, but we appreciate that. So as we wrap this up, I just want to give 1 minute to each panelist just to give us their view on the topic we have discussed, particularly climate change and El Nino for the scientists, and also 1 minute for impact-based focus, the advance in impact-based focus in the region. This, where are we getting it soon, or what do we get or anticipate? So I want to start with Chris. Climate change, El Nino. Has there been impact? Has there been a change in the Nino frequency impact going by the warming of the oceans? 1 minute, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Philip. There's probably been a change in the frequency, but there, I think, has almost certainly been a change in the strength of the events and their impacts on Eastern Africa. Since the El Nino of 2015-16, there was a strong El Nino, terrible drought in Ethiopia, followed by a strong La Nina event that caused sequential droughts. Then there was the Indian Ocean Dipole event of 2019, flooding. Then we had an incredible 3-year La Nina and 5 sequential droughts. And then we had this Indian Ocean Dipole and El Nino. So ICPAC definitely has job security. You are in the right place at the right time to make a big difference. And I think that's challenging, but also very exciting.
Thank you, Prof. Let me hear from Marceline. El Nino, climate change. In forecasting, have you noticed any impact, or just 1 minute, please?
So I'll try from the research that we see. So from the research, it's indicating that the teleconnections will definitely change. So it's something that we should really consider in the forecasting.
Thank you very much. I get to Nishad. How soon will this be rolled out in the region?
Yes, so it is being developed for last 1.5 years related to this aspect of improving IBF with certain conceptual understanding and adding the hazard and ensemble prediction system in the workflow chain. So we are expecting a soon release on this aspect to use it in disaster risk management operation center at the minimum level. And also we are in a very good position of having large scale changes in developments in artificial intelligence like generative AI, and also which also makes a better position to roll out IBF.
Thank you very much. Before I come to Jocelyn, there's one hand that is raised for a long time. I just want to give Tatiana Kroll 1 second to ask your burning question. I see there are 2 others, but I want to give Tatiana. Unmute and ask a question or give your comments. IT, if you could unmute Tatiana. Tatiana, can you ask a question? Okay, as she prepares, I see Abdi Shakur, Abdullahi, one of the response guy, many years experience. Abdi, can you raise your voice and ask your question? Your hand has been raised for a long time.
Colleagues, this is
You are
Tatiana. I have
muted.
already received answers to my questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Abdishakur. So, Jocelyn, parting thought, what would you advise? Gender forecasting, impact-based forecasting, going forward from next season that is going to be outlook that is going to be released in Kampala, Uganda.
Thank you, Dr. Philip. My final thoughts, which I had mentioned earlier, I want to emphasize is that we need to link the forecasting to climate or disaster preparedness and response planning, and making sure that this planning is gender responsive. And it should be for the different sectors and subsectors. It's not just to do the weather support member states to integrate into their different sector plans and disaster preparedness and response plans that are gender responsive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are looking forward to further engagement to tell us specifically how, you are giving us, we should, but we'll get to how you will propose on how do we fully integrate gender into this. So thank you so much. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our 1.5 hour webinar. I look at the questions that were sent here. There were about 15 open questions. We have seen over 20 answered. There are some which have been dismissed, but in my view, we have done extremely well because the people who asked the question did not re-ask them again. So I want to take opportunity to thank panelists, more so to Prof, who sacrificed his late hours of sleep just to be with us. Thank you very much. We are looking forward to your publication on the Niño that should be the latest over the region, and we will really appreciate. Much thanks to Dr. Marceline. We are looking forward to the next seasonal forecast, whether we are going to have 85% or 20% probability. I think, Mom, being difficult to focus, we are looking forward. And with the knowledge we have gotten from Chris, we are going to give our focus in appropriate manner. Nishad, thank you so much. The new tool in the region, and I saw you answered very well. Somebody was asking which are the tools used. Thank you for the good answer and for participation. To my co-moderator, thank you so much. We had put this together, and I want also to thank communication team, IT, ICPAC, for helping us to use this forum or this space successfully. So thank you so much. We are having our GHACOF in Kampala in the next few days. You have seen the announcement. We are kindly requesting that you join us so that we see further the impacts of Niño from member states as it happened. So with those many remarks, I want to give my moderator just to end it for us. Joyce.
Thank you so much, my co-moderator, and everyone for your participation, and the panelists for the insightful discussion. And also to let our participants know that we will post the video and audio recording on the YouTube channel, ICPAC YouTube channel. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon or good morning or good night to everyone.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope to see you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.